Great. So we have had quite a long session now on what is menstruation and how it impacts sport and everything else. But I think we have somebody who has so much experience and so much varied experience, and also especially working with female athletes from different sports, different cultures, different countries even, right? And I think this is a great opportunity to learn from him in terms of how all of these things actually translate into practical stuff on the ground, right? We have spoken a lot about theory, but I think it's very important to understand the whole practical part of it. And we have Wayne, who is so special, and it's such an honor, Wayne, to actually have you here for
thank
the
you.
Simply Wheels workshop. It's absolutely fantastic end of the year for us. So Wayne, I think the first question that I have for you is that, like I was telling everyone, that you've trained athletes in different countries, different sports, different age groups even, right? And I think every place, every system has its own culture, right? And there is their own traditions and stuff like that. And you've been in China, you've been in South Africa, you've been in India, and in so many other places as well. So my first question was that in terms of just understanding and adapting to different cultures, like a lot of the coaches also are coming from outside of Bangalore, and they're also getting used to the Lakshyan culture, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you adapt to this culture and then actually tackle or kind of initiate a conversation on something like a period, right? How do you do that?
Yeah. So if I can ask everyone a question before I answer, out of the male staff, have you ever had a conversation about periods with your female athletes? Anyone? Just hands up if you have had it. Okay, so that answers your question already. It's a taboo topic, and and in India, China was similar. China was where days 1 to 5 you don't train. They're just completely off. There's no question. There's no debate there. Whereas India, I think the thing was more on education side of things. As you can see, not one male hand was up, which means it's a topic that's very difficult for males to address. Western culture, it's very open. Athletes will come to you and say, listen, I'm on my period, what should I do? And to address that in India it's not easy. I think I would never address it a one-on-one with a female athlete. I don't think that's where my role falls in. What I try to make it out for the athletes would be from a physiology and a performance perspective, and address it as a team environment. And I think then it's a bit more comfortable for athletes to understand it. And I remember the first time I did I think it was kind of on the lines of this presentation with the girls, and I started talking about and I'm not a female, obviously, so I don't understand the symptoms and all those sort of things. I can read about it, but I can't experience it. So I started speaking about getting those cravings, premenstrual cravings, and everyone just started laughing. And they're like, "What? Now I understand why I'm craving a chocolate, why I'm craving whatever it might be, that the unhealthy foods." Leading to the period, and it was a nice conversation to have, because they were kind of feeling guilty about those cravings, because I was quite strict on sugar and that sort of thing, but in the end they needed to understand what was happening in that week leading to day 1, day 2, day 3, whatever it might be. And as soon as I got that understanding, then it was like, oh, it's actually okay if I have that craving. It's because that's what the body wants at that point in time. And then from there, you just start opening these conversations to why you're experiencing the cravings, why on days 1, 2, or 3, maybe you're low in energy, and how can we best, as a support staff, help you as an athlete perform on those days. Because the reality of the situation is we can't not train, because come Olympics, come competition time, the final might fall on your day 1. What do you do then? You pull out from the final? It's just not possible. So just the education side is important. I think, as I said to you in the corridor, is if you make the conversation awkward, it's going to be awkward. And I think as a male, it's really important that you don't make it awkward. And then from my side, I just try to address it from a pure physiology and a performance standpoint. How can we make things better for you as a female athlete to perform during the cycle, at different stages of the cycle as well? And that's, so that would probably be the background for me. Like I said, from a Western culture, it's a school topic. It's addressed at school, so it's pretty much open. So before I even need to address it, kids know more about it than I know, because it's a topic that is addressed at schools, whereas in India I think it's a little bit different. Maybe now it's changing. I know with the batch that I had for the hockey team, it wasn't the case, where they wouldn't have that education, they didn't have that openness to talk about it. I was very lucky to have a really good female physio with me as well, who would address that topic under closed doors and make it open discussion. So when I had the chat or the conversations with the athletes, it was easier for me as well.
Right. So I think one of the key things that I learned from this answer was that it was important to educate the athletes and also come from it from a point of view of physiology and performance, right? I mean, why are we talking about this subject is something which is very important. Also, I just wanted to ask you that, you coming in from outside of the country and when you told them that, we are going to sit down today and kind of talk about periods, what was the kind of reactions that you got from the girls and also from the coaches actually? I'm just guessing, how was the environment?
So I was quite strategic about it. I didn't come in and say, listen, it was kind of a presentation like this. I didn't say today we're going to be talking about periods. So what I did was I mapped out the Olympic plan for us and where we're at currently and what we need to do to perform at the Olympics. And then within that I started speaking about where we are physiologically and what can we do better to help the athletes. And then I slipped in the menstrual cycle into that whole conversation. And then you could just see the athletes start sitting up and listening and say, okay. It's okay to speak about this in front of everyone. It's okay to understand that on days 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it might be, maybe if it's longer, day 7, I must educate the coaches and say, listen, this is what's happening. Maybe they got excessive bleeding. Maybe they got excessive menstrual cramps and those sort of things. And then that actually started opening doors for me because I could understand the athletes better. But it wasn't a case where, make an appointment, we're going to be speaking about periods today. It was more a case where I kind of gradually slipped the conversation into it in a nice open environment and had present pictures on this is what it looks like, this is where estrogen and progesterone might be at different phases of the cycle, this is what the effects of these two hormones might be, and then the cravings. The cravings one just opened the door for me because everyone just loved it because they could understand what was happening. I think if you go in and say, listen, we're going to be speaking about periods today, it becomes that awkward conversation. But if we're speaking about this is our map to Olympic Games, this is our map and how we're going to perform at this level. And these are the things we need to address. And one thing we never addressed was the menstrual cycle. And adding it into the conversation and then having the female physio there, adding her bit, especially getting information lost in translation, making sure that is translated for. And then from there, she started actually having workshops with the athletes behind doors about just general topics on menstrual cycle, sexual health, all those sort of things. And that becomes really important from a support staff perspective because then I don't need to be there. I can look at the performance side of things. And all the more personal things can be taken care of by the female staff as well.
Awesome. Great. So I think one of the things that, it would help all of us to understand from your experience especially, how does exactly, can you give us some examples of how a menstrual cycle, or the phases of the cycle impact an athlete and both physically and mentally? I think some examples would really help us understand it better.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm sure in this whole day of talking, you guys have chatted about it, and to date, and Priyanka, you can come in whenever you want because you've had a lot of experience on this. To date, the literature is not that sound on saying, okay, this phase of your cycle, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. There are guidelines that we can use. And also the reality of the situation is if I've got a team of 33 athletes, everyone's, and I don't know if you spoke about syncing of cycles in groups. So you do get these cohorts are within your cohort that will sync their cycles. So you've got a bit of an idea of where they're at. But again, I think if you've got a team of athletes where you're trying to adjust training for each individual according to their 28 or 30 or 33 day cycle, depending on the individual, it becomes really tough. It's almost impossible. So what we did, there's 3 things that we looked at. We looked at, did they miss their cycle? Do they have excessive cramps, excessive bleeding, and then excessive fatigue? If we looked at those main aspects of it, and then we relied on the athlete's feedback on those sort of things. So we know if you miss 1 cycle, okay, it's not too bad. 2, start looking into 3, 4 becomes a problem. And those are the education sides of things. Premenstrual cramps, so the menstrual cramps and pain side was a big thing for us. We had a few athletes who suffered really, really significantly from that. And then it's fine, because at least they know it's okay to tell us, and then we say rest. It wasn't purely about whether the estrogen levels are high or progesterone levels are high or low or whatever it might be. It's just, this is the symptoms I'm feeling now. I'm feeling really shitty. Can I rest? Yeah, 100%, not a problem. Then we know, okay, you on your day 1, day 2, whatever it might be, take it easy, not a problem. Or we adjust it. So, okay, maybe you're not going to do the high intensity session today, go for a light cycle, or if you need, just go for rest or extra sleep. So those are the main aspects we looked at, and I'll show you just now, but we had a monitoring system where we put that into place to ensure that I knew where every player was within their cycle a little bit. But we made it relatively informal in the sense that they would just give me a count between day 1 and 5 and between day 5 and 8 or whatever it might be, and then I'll be able to just map it out and get an idea. Then we also had each player download Fit Our Woman, which was a menstrual cycle app, and that was really nice because it's really educational, so it gives you all the information at each day as well. So it starts educating them, and then they actually start educating me, because it's a nice way for them to learn without me telling them. And then they start learning a bit more about themselves, because as an athlete I want them to be PhDs on their body. They want to know exactly what's happening and understanding, because the better they understand their bodies, the better it is for me. And the more feedback I can get is obviously the better. So those were the main parameters we looked at, especially the cramps. Those were the big ones for us. The symptoms of day 1, day 2, day 3, or whatever it might be, became really important for us, because with that becomes fatigue, and the ability to actually just perform becomes really tough. To date, there hasn't been too many athletes that we've pulled out of training. We've modified it, but there would be occasion where we'd need to pull an athlete out because they just couldn't perform. It's just too painful.
Okay, great. So in terms of how, I mean, we've spoken a little bit about the physical aspects of menstruation, but have you seen any of the mental aspects of it at all? Like in terms of, like, a lot of times, I mean, we were talking about PMS in the workshop, and a lot of coaches spoke about mood swings and feeling irritated, and somebody also said somebody has thrown a bottle at me.
Wow, who was that?
So we are not going to name names, but that also came up. So
okay, that's interesting.
Have you experienced the mental part of menstruation at all, when dealing with
look, I think it depends on the individual. Some athletes are really good at hiding what's happening in their life in general, not just during their cycle. But you definitely pick certain mood swings. Mood swings are always the big one, and you can pick it up. But again, relating it to the menstrual cycle was not my primary aim. My primary aim was to identify where are they at psychologically at any point in time and how to adjust it. And then, say for example, on our monitoring system, we found that their mood isn't great. Then we start digging deeper, and then I'll look, okay, they are in this phase of the cycle, whatever it might be, and we just open conversations. And the key for me is to let athletes understand that it's okay to feel not so great today, or okay to be grumpy. And that's what I would say for him. My philosophy is human being before athlete, athlete before sport specific. And why I say human being is that because everyone has individual personal problems. Everyone maybe had a fight with their boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it might be, family, whatever. So we need to understand them on a human perspective first. And that's not only from the menstrual cycles, but from the personality of that athlete. And if you can understand the athlete's personality better, you probably understand the responses to the cycle a little bit better also, and vice versa. But again, I think the mood swings and that sort of thing, it's athlete to athlete. There is definitely some athletes that they react a little bit worse than certain athletes. But again, I think addressing it on an individual basis is extremely important. And also you just need to, I still feel the most important thing of the whole takeaway is let them feel okay about how they're feeling at that moment in time. If you make it, you're on your period again, like, of course they're going to feel like, they can't address, come to us and explain everything. It's part of life. It's going to happen. Us as coaches, us as performance staff need to accept it and need to understand it, and it is what it is. And we just got to help the athletes feel comfortable in that environment at that time, and if we have to adjust training, we adjust training. If we need to give them rest, we give them rest. I think that's the key.
Awesome. I think I have of course done some research before I came in, and I've seen more in a lot of your interviews. You speak greatly about the whole idea of how building trust with your athletes and the communication part of it is so important, right? Because I think and I think for even when we do our workshops, one of the key things that we tell all of the coaches is that it all starts from communication,
Yeah.
because you can't have a conversation on anything like that without it. So I just wanted to, and again for you especially, again coming from outside to to a foreign land and then actually building that, could you give us some practical ways of how did you do it? Like how did you build a culture where people could come up and speak, and it was open, and because we keep saying open communication, but we don't know what it means. So.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think I got like a recipe. This is a recipe you must take and apply it to get that open communication. I think it comes down to a little bit of you as a person and how you are presented to the athletes that you're working with. I think if you come across as like I said earlier, a little bit awkward in these conversations, they're never going to open up to you. There was in a good paper by McNatty, and they've got this diagram that says the first line of communication is having someone to talk to. And I think that's really important. So we're really lucky in our environment. They had the female physio they could speak to, but they also in the end felt comfortable saying to me, listen, I'm on a period, leave me alone, type thing. And I was never going to be the person who says, again, now what are we doing? Now you want to rest again or whatever. I think if they realize that you got their best interest at heart at whatever time it might be, that goes a long way. And it's just, I always say, no one wants to know how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's really important for me. If the athlete knows that the decisions we make for them at that point in time is in their best interest, not only in my interest for the performance of the team, but in their individual best interest, it makes a huge difference. And then they know they can actually, being approachable. I think that's a key line of communication. If you're not approachable and you're a little bit awkward when they come to you with this information, or a bit pushy-offy when they come to you, of course they're not going to come to you. They're not going to want to explain. Or if you get grumpy, now we have to rest you again. It's small, little sarcastic comments that can not come across nicely to the athletes and make it like, I'm not going to tell you again. And whereas we want that open community, especially with the cycle, it becomes really important for us.
Yeah, awesome. So one of the challenges that we have faced in terms of, especially with period tracking, right? Because we deal with athletes who are not elite in the sense like we're not dealing with an Indian team, and the pressures are not that high. And we are dealing with grassroots athletes, normal junior, senior athletes. And how did you, the habit creation of things, right? That you need to just track these 4 things every day. How did you do that? Like, how did you implement that and get athletes to do it? Because it's very tough.
Bottom line, I was a pain in the ass. I was on them every day. Listen, I need the data, because the data we're collecting, which I'll show you now, wasn't just about the periods. It was about training load, it was about neuromuscular fatigue, all the above. Because I think if you only look at the cycle in isolation, you don't start understanding the performance benefits or the performance effects on it. So we looked at quite a lot of data, and I collected that daily. So for me to understand, besides the cycle side of things, where we at as a team, I was collecting a lot of other data, and then through that, the implementation of the cycle tracking became a bit easier because it just formed part of the questions that they needed to answer every day. And the other aspect for me is I always provided feedback. So whether it was in a report format, or if I saw something was wrong with the athlete, I'd go and chat to them. So it creates an open dialogue with them. I think some athletes don't want to approach you to tell you things, but they're happy to put it on an app, and then you see it, and then if you approach them, they'll maybe chat to you. So it's a way of getting communication going rather than just collecting data. I think that's also important in any monitoring system, or monitoring or tracking cycles, or whatever it might be. I think from my side, it was, we're looking at a lot of data, but this is just part of it, but it's an important part of it. So it's not the main, don't feel like it's a main part, and don't feel awkward about it, it's information. And it was never super personal information, just where are you in your cycle, and did you miss your cycle for now? And then the education side was that if you are having excessive bleeding, please report to the physio and make sure that we had that, so we actually know what's happening. And then to give the athletes understanding of what is excessive bleeding, whether it's 7 days, is it changing pads or tampons 2 times within the hour, or whatever it might be, is it clots coming through or being released, or whatever it might be. And that education process, it starts opening their mind and understanding, and then they'll go to at least have someone within your team environment that's approachable. And for those like more personal information, I think a female is a better bet than a male, to be honest. But again, that communication, they were also happy for that information to be shared with myself, so I got an understanding of what's happening, but maybe they wouldn't feel as comfortable just sharing that specific information with me, the more personal side of things.
So in terms of, I mean, I understood that one thing, that you have to be a pain in the ass in terms of, you know, getting all this data.
Getting data,
Yeah, but did you also have like, you know, like a habit thing that, you know, every morning you get up and you do it, or was it, you know, you do it at your own will?
No.
Like what was the...
So the rule of thumb was I needed all the information before first training session. So at breakfast they needed to submit all their data. So we would collect morning wellness data, so how they're feeling in the morning. So that's where we'd get the moods stuff, as well as the cycle information. And then I'll be able to compile that before training session. I'll send it out to the coaches. Okay, this is where we're at, and so on and so forth. And if we pick anything up, then I can approach the individual athlete at training and say, okay, look, what's happening, and do we need to adjust, don't we need to adjust, and so on and so forth. I'd say probably 95% of the time we didn't adjust for them. They carried on because they also were understanding that I need to learn how to play and train during this period, and that's also important for us. But again, like I said, individual basis, if someone has excessive symptoms or just really feeling bad, there's no issue for resting. Missing one training session or two training sessions is not going to change the world, and I think that's the key to understand.
So last two questions from me before I open it up. I hope you guys have a lot of questions for Wayne as well. So one of the things that, I mean, I come from an individual sport. I played badminton, right? But when you're dealing with a team sport and you think about, you know, all the cycles and, you know, matching those cycles and the training, and like you said, it's extremely difficult. And you have mostly worked with team sport athletes as well, right? So how did you manage that? Well, I'm sure there's technology in place, but you know, when it comes to the cycle and kind of making sense of it and then tailoring your you know, your training, what are the challenges that one can face in a team sport, and then how do you combat those challenges? What do you put in place to make it easy?
I think from an actual cycle perspective, it's super challenging, close to impossible to, especially in individual sports, really easy. You can tailor it for individual sports, but in team sports where your training relies on numbers and coaches plan according to numbers, it becomes really difficult. But again, I think it's more of an education side with the athletes that you're actually working with. So getting them to understand, and for me to understand, okay, if they're in, let's say if we want late luteal phase, progesterone's high, we're getting a very thick blood plasma. Thick blood plasma means that I'm going to recover slower because I've got this high core temperature, for example. High core temperature means I'm going to get fatigued quicker, especially in humid environments because I don't sweat as much. Understanding those processes and getting the coaches to understand those processes is important. So like, she just needs a little bit more rest, but she'll be fine. And then they're actually a bit more open. Okay, that's fine. She'll be back now. She just needs that extra time because it's this phase of the cycle. Or we also know, like, if the estrogen's high, it's actually an anabolic hormone, and we need that hormone. But we also know at that same time they might cause extra joint laxity. So maybe we avoid a little bit of agility work for that day for that athlete, or for that period for that athlete. But avoiding everything I don't think is good either, because they need to learn how to perform in these environments, but just being cognizant of what the physiological effects are important. And I think the progesterone one for me is really important because that affects performance big from a recovery perspective. And if in a sport like field hockey where we got rolling rotations, we need them to recover quite quickly and get back on, it becomes really important to understand where they're at. So if they aren't cooling quick enough, we need cooling strategies to help them cool quick enough. Or if it's Tokyo, our last game, I think it was 45 degrees and about 80% humidity or whatever. In that phase, like, how do we adjust for our players at that point in time? And actually our players were fine, and then the rule for the Olympics there was we'd have an extra 5-minute break between at the halfway point of each quarter. It actually affected us more negatively than it did the GB team. We wanted to play on because we had just planned for it. So I still feel if we had played on, we probably would have maybe actually got closer to winning that game. And just understanding and putting these places and education in place so the players know, okay, listen, I'm in this phase. So when I come off, I must do an ice towel. I must drink cold. That was a difficult one for me, is drinking cold water. Thunder pani, they don't like. So exactly. So it was forcing them to understand that, okay, in this phase, your core temperature is rising a lot quicker and you're fatiguing. So have a little bit of cold water so it actually help you a bit more. It's not going to make you sick. You're not going to get flu. You'll be fine. And so those systems and processes are important, and getting them to understand it and the benefits of certain implementation of recovery strategies, cooling strategies becomes important. And then it's driven by the players and not the staff. And then you're winning the game, I think. I think then you're halfway there, actually all the way there, because the players are taking responsibility for themselves because they've been educated on what's happening. I think you're pretty much set then.
Yeah, awesome. One last question. So in terms of a lot of our coaches here, right, we may not have a team of people, right? I mean, we will not have like a physio and a strength and conditioning coach and nutrition. I mean, in a place like Lakshyan, maybe there is a space for that. But a lot of coaches actually tell us that I'm one coach and I have 30 athletes with me training, and you want me to monitor so many things, come up with strategies, and all of that. So what would you say to a coach like that? Like, what can they do, to kind of make sure that there is some connection with the physiology part of, things, and how do they combat that challenge of being 1:30 and not having enough support there?
Sure. That's a good question. I don't think I've got a definite answer, but what I would say, I think as coaches, you need to be open to them approaching you. You need to be, allow athletes to come to you and say, listen, on my day one. Swimming becomes a really complex one. Where's Nirup? I don't know if you've experienced it yet. I'll give you, just off the top, I'll give you a funny story, is that during the women's IPL, so women's IPL is, you got foreign female athletes and you got Indian female athletes. So I want to do ice bars, pool recovery, whatever it is. Indian players would never get into the ice bath or pool during the period. The Western players didn't care. Now one Western player actually said, what's wrong? Just put a tampon in and get in. And I was looking at this whole thing fall into place, and like, the Western players don't understand the culture of the periods within India, maybe, and one big thing is tampons aren't really used here as much, whereas pads are used more. So with tampons you can get into the water, you can, and that's just an education side. And it was just a really interesting dynamic for me, just sitting back watching the Western players saying this, the Indian players like, you crazy, the Western players thinking they crazy, and it was like, okay. And then eventually the Western players are in the water and all the Indian players just sitting outside like, okay, you guys are weird. But yeah, these are the processes that you need to understand, and I think both sides need to understand the culture. And like I said, swimming becomes a completely different phenomenon, especially within India. But I think things are changing slowly. You guys will know better than I do. But yeah, I think I went off the topic. What was your actual question?
No, so I was just saying that if
the coaches,
I mean, if the ratio is 1 coach to 30 girl athletes, what are the key things maybe you can suggest that these are the things that you should know about them? Maybe not the whole thing, but at least these things they should be interact with.
Yeah, I think knowing your athletes from a mood perspective, like we spoke about, is quite, you can start picking things up from a mood perspective quite easily. Again, maybe you just got a grumpy athlete and they're always grumpy, then it's difficult, I don't know. But I think being approachable is my best advice, is being open for them to come to you and say, listen, coach, I'm not feeling too good. And in India, it was always, the words to me were always girl problems. I've got girl problems.
Or my stomach.
And then you know immediately, or in the beginning, before I had the conversation with him, today I can't get into the ice bath. Then I knew why. It's just simple. Then it's the ways they communicate and understanding and picking up the small cues. Okay, they're not getting in the water. And in my first days, I was like, why? And then the physio would say, stomach problems. Then you know, okay, cool, fine. So it's also an education process. So it's not, I didn't come in here and just know everything. It's also an education process from my side. But eventually you have to understand the culture that you're in. Also understand how the athletes communicate their issue at that point in time, and just being accepting and open to them communicating. Being an individual coach with a whole lot of athletes becomes quite tough because it is an education time, and your job is to get them better at their sport. So you don't want to waste time educating about the period, or you maybe don't feel comfortable educating about the period. But I think with foundations like yourselves, there's so much information out there. I think it's key that you have some sort of system to share information with your athletes, whether it's information leaflet, whether it's online workshops that you find. I think, and the other aspect is with parents. If you can get the parents to buy into it and the parents to talk to their athletes a lot earlier, because I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably a taboo topic at home also still, and it's not easy to address. I think maybe in future it will change a little bit because maybe you got more inquisitive kids or whatever it might be. But I think just being one, as a coach, you need to be approachable. If you, again, back to my first statement, if you make it awkward, it will be awkward. And then I think the problem with female athletes and male coaches would be, as soon as you've lost that trust once, it's gone. They're not going to approach you again. And then you'll have no idea. And it's not only from the menstrual cycle side, that will be the cause of it, but the after effects are even worse. Because then they say, well, you don't care about me personally. You probably don't actually worry about my performance because you don't want to take my advice or take where I am at the moment. So it's really important that you pick those cues up, because you don't want to destroy a relationship on 1 or 2 days of no training or whatever it might be. But yeah, I'm not sure if that actually answered. Maybe we've got some practical examples how you guys have done it, because you guys are the coaches, and maybe it's. Has anyone had those? I know you said no one's really had those conversations, but what are your ideas of trying to have those conversations with your athletes?
Yes, as you said, you have to set it up in the right way so that you can slip in those main things in between, so that it won't become awkward, and so that you share the knowledge and you get them understanding in a right way and have that trust issue. If you break that trust, then you cannot make it again.
For sure.
You have to be very careful where you are adding these things and how you are getting these knowledge sharing. So in between the other, like as you said, your physical performance sessions, in between those sessions you are adding these points. So yeah, that you should be knowing where you have to add and how you set the stage in a way so that they take it in a right approach.
Oh, for sure. Priyanka, from your experience, help us males understand it.
So being a woman, it hasn't been really a problem. Like women coming and talking about the same thing. And secondly, being a physio readily available, that's the first person they go to. So I don't think so there was a challenge in this aspect. But the challenge came because we are getting people from different communities and different backgrounds, and some don't want to talk about it even to the women because they haven't been comfortable talking it to their mothers as well. So, and then they don't understand why it is happening because they are getting periods for the first time in front of you, and they are already scared because their seniors have told them that if you tell this to the coach and he won't let you practice, and you won't be practicing for 5 days, and maybe the competitions you'll get cramps and all this, so they're already very scared about it. So to deal that, the proper counseling has to be done. I think that's where the things goes better. One-to-one is also good. So for us, for me, what I used to do is take their on the day one when they come in, we will take some questionnaires, we'll find it out how is their schedule, how is it going, is there any doubts which they have, because I know 3 or 4 they don't even know what is period, how many times it should come in a year, how many days it should go, and they are like 15-year-old. So still, so those kind of things I think will help. So that's how.
And and I'm asking the questions, but what advice would you give us as males to approach this conversation? Because I think it's really important that someone like you who understands the whole process, understands athletes, can shed some of your experience and how we can make it a better environment for them to talk to us.
So more than male talking about it straight, I think it would be better if it's a combined thing. Like we also have to help you out somewhere. It's not that only you guys have to take the initiative. Like I think that nowadays coaches are more open to it, they keep on talking about it. But yeah, if you already have a queue between, like you told me that you guys do an athlete monitoring where there are a few questions, and we already informed the coach about the same. He already has something in mind that okay, this could be a problem, and there is something where she can feel fatigue. So he will talk about maybe a fatigue and not exactly about the periods. And it would be more sensitive and more understanding as per the athlete. So then they will take it forward in that way. That can be done.
Okay. Cool. Any other male staff?
What Wayne said in the setting that we are working, it is very important to get the parents on board. So whether it is any suggestion that the coach is making or any data that we want to plan our trainings better or to, let's say, alarm them on certain medications. So more than the child, it's the parent that we have to convince and make sure that whatever we are saying, the child ends up trusting that.
Yeah.
So that is something that we have to work on as coaches.
And Nirab, so can I ask you, how do you handle it for swimming at the moment? Because that's obviously a big one.
See, because I come from a very rural background.
Sure.
Initially when I started, I didn't have idea when a child would come and tell me that no, I can't get into the water. I was like, I knew, but I was not comfortable to ask
Sure.
them.
Yeah.
But then, I came to the city and then, I started interacting with many coaches about this issue. Then they said like, it's very normal thing, you shouldn't make it obvious that, you don't talk to them and all. And then what we did, we called a gynecologist with the nutritionist.
Yeah.
We also started explaining the parents and the swimmers. And then slowly, as I told, we started talking to the swimmers about, everything normally. And then, the children started opening up. Even the parents are also, when they, the first time when they, start the menstrual cycle, they would actually come and ask us, what should we do? Can we, is there any person who can help us with this? Then we would tell the senior swimmers, okay, they can guide you because they have already experience in this one. And then one of our senior swimmers, she suggested us an app, okay, to keep track of this. Then we made it mandatory that, whoever had this menstrual cycle, they have to this. And then if they exceed 36 days, okay, then, we would ask them to come and talk to us, and then, we would get them to the...
Okay, awesome.
For the support.
Nice.
That's what we did.
Well done.
But it really worked actually.
Yeah.
Like we had a couple of swimmers. I had one swimmer. She had a problem of this cycle for she wouldn't have this menstrual cycle for 3-4 months. And then we were able to fix it because we started using this app.
Oh, 100%. It's education. Yeah.
Any questions?
I have a question. But it's not related exactly to this topic.
Sure.
But when the athletes peak, because we follow a certain cycle, 43 days or 48 days they take to peak in a couple of sports.
Yeah.
So that time, if the menstrual cycle happens, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's very tough. It just basically, that's why I think it's important in training that they do as much as they can whenever they are in their cycle, because as soon as you start adjusting it, it's exactly what you're saying. What happens if they have to peak on day 1, day 2, day 3? You're going to have to carry on. I don't know if you guys spoke about the use of the pill, but in Western culture, it's quite a big thing in elite athletes to use a pill to regulate their menstrual cycle, so they know exactly what's happening, when it's happening, so they can plan it better. In Indian society, I think it's not really that prominent at the moment. I know I've spoken to a couple of athletes who have tried it, and mentally they felt like it was just not right for them in India. So I think it's a slow burn at the moment from a sense of education, and I think also maybe the gynecologists aren't too aware of athletes and the use of pills, and you guys will know better. So I think that's really important, is that you find a really good gynecologist who understands athletes, who understands sport and the reasoning behind it, because I think it's also a bit of a guilt factor because you're changing the hormones within your body. And Priyanka, you can come in here whenever, but from a Western culture thing, I'd say 50% of Western athletes are probably using the pill to regulate their periods, to ensure that they can perform with confidence, that they know what's happening.
Yeah. This looks very interesting to you.
Yeah, so we spoke about monitoring, and so this is the data that we collected with the athletes for the hockey side. So from wellness data, readiness data, and so on and so forth, and what we found was we looked at the team readiness, which is this score up here. So readiness score is a percentage of different answers they give me over each day. And what we found in the study is that when the team, from an on-field performance perspective. Either it didn't have an effect or the players were really good and used to it. And I think that's both good aspects to it because like I said, we didn't adjust our training according to the cycle. We only adjusted training according to their symptoms. And that made a big difference. So we got physiological response, so that would be how they performed on the pitch from some GPS data and readiness data. And then we also had athlete readiness, sleep, and whatever else it might be on this far side of here. And then we looked at other aspects like neuromuscular fatigue. That's just the, let's show you, yeah. We looked at neuromuscular fatigue data as well, which is this data up here. So how's their body responding? And then I could correlate, so the bottom graph is where they are in their menstrual cycle. So then we can start looking at how is the neuromuscular system responding to different parts of, or where they're at in the menstrual cycle as well. And then this information here is their wellness data, so their mood response, how they're feeling, are they feeling ready to train, are they not feeling ready to train, and so on and so forth. And as you can see, I don't know if I can zoom in properly, but you can see, so each line is a different phase of them. So day 1 to 5, if it goes below the line, it just means they missed their cycle. So then it gives me an idea if it's below the line, they missed their cycle, then we have a chat. If they day 1 to 5 over there, if they day 5 to 13, they'll be in this line over here. If they in day 13 to 16, will be there, and 17 to 18. Sometimes obviously we know it varies from athlete to athlete. And then we got a good idea of where our athletes are at. So I could probably say that each cohort that you can see within it, they're probably syncing. They'll probably be spending most time together. So each of these small little cohorts, so this couple of athletes here, these two, those 4, and this 8 or whatever athletes, they'll probably be syncing. And then it starts making your life a little bit easier to get an idea where they're at. But yeah, so this is data we'd get on a daily basis, and it'll keep updating, and then I could give that to the coach of that. So it's not only from the menstrual cycle, but we're looking at how's their mood affected to at that day, and what's the menstrual cycle at that point in time. Neuromuscular profiles, we're getting training load data, and so on and so forth. And you start putting the whole picture together and say, okay, at this point in the cycle, this player maybe has an effect on this and this, and so on and so forth. But as I mentioned earlier, in a team environment becomes a bit difficult because you want them to train. And if I go to, imagine I went to the coach and said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players are out for today, he's just going to look at me crazy. It's just not possible. So, but what I can say to him is, just be aware, if we got 5 or 6 players that are in the first 1 to 5 days of their cycle, I don't even have to mention their names because you'll start picking it up as they play and that sort of thing. But then at least he's been aware, or she's been aware, made aware of what's happening, and then we can then they're more. If it's a sudden thing where we're just pulling players out, the coaches get a bit anxious, right? So imagine as a basketball coach, I come to you and you need to do 4v4, and I take all your numbers away and you can't do 4v4, you're not going to be happy. So it's really important that the communication is clear. And we say to you, listen, you can do your 4v4, but let's maybe make the field a little bit bigger so it's not too much change direction, because these 4 or 5 athletes are on day 1 to 5, or maybe someone on the late luteal phase, so estrogen might be higher, whatever it might be. So let's just adjust it, not stop training, but we adjust it so we're not at risk of ligamentous injuries, as an example.
Is that going to affect the others' training also?
It could in effect maybe the specific outcomes, but I think as a skill coach, your other skill is to adjust your training to make sure it doesn't affect those athletes also. So you could say, okay, listen, you 8 are doing 4v4, but on, I don't know, 10 by 10 meter, and you guys are doing 4v4 and 5v5 meter, whatever it might be.
That means that skill coach should be knowing who is that affected.
Yeah, I think it's always beneficial. Again, in an environment where maybe you don't have that information, becomes a little bit difficult. But in the ideal world, that's what we would want. We didn't do it too much in hockey as well, because again, like I said, I didn't want to change too much, because if we change it every time, then when we need to peak and they happen to fall on day 1, it becomes a bit of a problem. But I think being aware of it, and if you get the athlete's feedback, then you have to adjust. I think it's really important. So yeah, so that's how we would get the data and that sort of thing. And it was very simple, quite a few questions I'd fill in. I'll get the data and then I'll be able to put it on a graph like that. Nothing personal, you don't see too much information. It's just, this is where I'm in my cycle. I can look at their mood and say, okay, they're in this part of their cycle, they're day 1, their mood is lower than normal. Okay, all correlates, fine. Let's see if we can push on, we push on. If we can't, then we pull you out and do whatever we can.
Awesome.
So
Just one question with this
is that, I mean, in terms of finding patterns of, especially related to the cycle, is there like a span that one has to look at the data to make sense of it? Or, is it monthly? How did you make sense of the data?
So the rule of thumb is you need about 8 weeks of solid data to start making good inferences from it, and good, solid, consistent data. Unfortunately, athletes do get data entry fatigue also. That's why I said you have to kind of be on their butts to listen, you need to submit the data. And I was quite good with that, but over time, they were fine. They were just, if I don't do it, he's going to moan again, so I might as well do it. So I think, I think you need a good 8 weeks of data to start making decisions on that data. I think you can look at data and start seeing patterns earlier, but really solid, good database of 2 months is probably what you would look at.
Okay, understood. Okay.
So yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
Do you integrated any testing, like max testing with respect to sport or strength and conditioning? And was there any protocol you followed that max test should not happen to decide the training protocol during, obviously in terms of team sport it's a bit difficult.
Yeah.
Individually you can still do that, but is there anything like blood test we do on phase wise, like you have specific window where you have to do a blood test for female?
Sure.
Is there something with respect to strength and conditioning where the maximum testing or different qualities like speed, endurance, strength, or jump performance, everything which has anything which would help us to know in this phase and during periods how she performs and all the data is?
That's a really good question. We personally didn't do it because we didn't have the resources to do that. I think for sure you can take blood samples and get estrogen levels, progesterone levels, because that'll give you good understanding of what you can and can't do, or what you should adjust for. I think in the real world and reality it becomes quite tough to do that because you have to monitor it pretty much daily then to see that there are these increases, because some people might have a rapid linear increase and some might have a gradual increase in these hormones. But I think it's a really good idea. Whether it's possible, it's possible. Whether it's practical is another story. So personally we didn't do it, again, because I wanted to try to create an environment where it was normal to perform at any time. If an athlete came to me again and said, listen, I'm not feeling good today, I don't want to do maximal testing, then I also, okay, why, what's wrong, I have the data, then I can adjust for it, then okay, fine, don't test, not a problem. But from a blood test point of view, we didn't do it, but I think it's a really good idea. So you got a business model there that you can bring out and say, listen, here's an app, maybe because nowadays what's happening in sports science is a lot of salivary tests happening. So you can come up with an app with saliva testing and get estrogen and progesterone levels, and then it'll give you ideas on your training protocols according to that. So you got a business model there. So I think it's cool.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a question.
Is it a good idea to put the human athletes in the heart rate monitor when they are in this phase?
I would say why not? To be honest, I don't know if anyone else has any ideas, but I think the more again, like you saw in the presentation, you can't manage what you don't measure. So to see their physiological response at different times of their cycle, really, that would be awesome. So if you can give them, I wouldn't say just during days 1 to 2, I think you need to try and monitor it throughout their training so you can see if there are fluctuations in it. Water becomes a little bit different, but if you in water all the time, the response is reliable. But again, I think the key there is also the core temperature. So if you can get heart rate plus core temperature, that would be really cool to see. But for sure, heart rate is a minimum. I think as a swimming coach with your elite group, I think there should be heart rate monitoring as much as possible. And the other one would be interesting is lactate, to see what the lactate response is at different phases. I don't have an answer for you, but it would be a really good study. So there comes your blood stuff. So you can get lactate, estrogen, and progesterone at different intensities at different cycles. So that'll be really super interesting.
So is it already in Western countries they are manipulating with this existing results and utilizing it for their advantage or short?
I don't know at this level, but they're definitely using a lot of saliva is the new big thing, but the technology is a little bit slow on it because you don't want to be collecting blood all the time. With saliva, you can get really good data from it, but not all parameters are available in saliva yet. But there are a lot of countries that are actually doing it quite in depth. Again, it's a trick between whether you're doing too much or you're doing too little, because using your athletes and getting saliva, getting data, getting blood, it can drive athletes crazy. So I think you've got to be careful on how much stuff we take from athletes as well, because it becomes quite invasive also. So I think we're just going to be careful. Whereas heart rate is really easy to do, not invasive at all. And gives you good information, and it's a good proxy for lactate. It's a good proxy for everything. So, yeah.
Like I read one paper where they said that knee laxity is something they're doing
Yes.
quite, like measuring knee laxity across the cycle.
Okay.
There is no hardcore data that the injuries are specific to that, but like have you ever seen, or is there anything with respect to activation, neuromuscular drills, which can help, or like for a physio just to do a passive knee mobility test? Something
So
like
you do a little
that
Lachman's
actually-
test before they train, and then estrogen's high, can't train.
But like they only from the recommendation they have
Yeah.
a moderately strong recommendation
No, for sure.
for knee laxity,
Yeah,
and
no.
they didn't have any other recommendation
Yeah.
with respect to physio.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So is there any activation, mobility, or something we can do, or like in the studies they are basically doing with the arthrometer, which is impossible
For sure.
in practical
Yeah.
settings. But what can be like, especially if we can demark, like I had seen people get injured, but I don't want to take okay, it's because of there are
Yeah,
many factors
for
which
sure.
cause injury.
Yeah.
But
No?
is there anything where we can screen?
Yeah. Good question. I don't have an answer for you, but I think if you could do something like that, that's great. I think the best screening tool is monitoring the cycle. So you get an idea where they're at, then you can almost generically say, okay, listen, you're at this phase in the cycle. We know estrogen's high, so more than likely there's going to be more laxity. So let's implement more stability drills or neuromuscular drills. But from an actual screening perspective, I don't know, Priyanka, if you've heard anything like pre-training screening for...
Pre-training or someone like the whole before pre-season you do.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah.
Someone who
Yeah,
has
yeah.
already some
Yeah,
predisposing
so-
factors you keep
For sure.
monitor.
Okay.
Something like
Yeah,
that.
for sure. So from like physio side, for sure, they do a lot of musculoskeletal screening, and all that is taken care of by the physios on board, and then they would give like, okay, this athlete, this is the profile of the athlete, they may be predisposed to X, Y, and Z, and then you implement different structures. So I think one of the sports that have done it best is football. So football, they've got all the different protocols. The interesting thing about football, they got the best research, but they still got the most injuries. So that's the interesting thing about football, is that like FIFA have done a great job on all their research that they're doing, and implementing the 11 plus for the knee and the 11 plus for shoulder or whatever it might be. But they're still getting a huge amount of injuries because they don't change the way they train or how their season's structured. But again, to answer your question, yeah, pre-screening is really important. And how you take that data and implement different strategies becomes really important. And you can mitigate injury risk, but you're not going to take it away. There's always going to be a risk of injury. And I think being cognizant of where that athlete is at in their cycle becomes important, especially if you get someone like with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so excessive laxity of their limbs. So Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, those that don't know, got very lax limbs. So if you get, like most of the time it's in girls, if they do that, their arms are like going down here, or they can touch their, whatever it might be. And then you put that, put their thumbs like this. Or, and if you got someone who's in a certain stage of their cycle as well, that's got Ehlers-Danlos, I don't know if it actually increases the risk because they're so lax already, so maybe it's okay, I don't know, you'll know better. But definitely pre-screening is really important. And then putting strategies in place to mitigate injury is really important, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily cycle dependent, but definitely from a female athlete perspective, we know they're predisposed to knee injuries. And it's not only from a laxity perspective, as hip angles, Q angles, and so on and so forth becomes really important. But yeah.
There was one last question.
if you are hiring, if you are hiring someone for the performance side or skill side of any female professional sport, what is it the basic knowledge that you as you've done before? What is the basic knowledge you
Yeah, it's a good question.
Have,
Yeah.
at least minimum. I mean, understanding of female physiology.
Yeah. For me, the minimum is understanding the cycle. If you can understand the cycle and understand what the recommended information is out there at the moment and how to approach it, that would be the minimum. I remember interviewing one female S&C once, and my feedback to her was, look, I feel you're ready for the job, but you don't actually understand female physiology like you should. And the other day she sent me an email and said, I took your words to heart, and I've registered for a PhD in female physiology, looking at menstrual cycle, training loads, and those sort of things. So I think understanding the cycle would be my bare minimum, and understanding the risk of injury for females, but that's for everyone. Cycle would be my go-to, and that's generally my questions are asked in the interviews, like what is your understanding of female physiology and how the cycle might affect it, and what are your go-to measures to mitigate risk of injury and those sort of things. But yeah.
So you know how to work for Wayne.
Go read.
You know what you need to do. Nikunj, you had a question?
From a high-performance team sport training environment perspective, you talked about that there's a model of syncing the cycle there, right?
Yeah.
I hope that is naturally. But talking from a global best practices approach environment,
Yeah.
as the SSF team mentioned that there are medications that can help manipulate the cycle to a certain extent.
Sure.
So is that being done at the elite level, wherein you have groupings of players being done with little artificial manipulation, so that the training and the peaking can be a little bit streamlined?
Yeah. My simple answer, I don't know. But I assume it possibly can be. Maybe you guys know, or maybe you guys got more information on that. I don't know if they do it according to that like syncing cohort. I'm not sure. I think they just do it according to the individual cycle. Because I don't know enough about how the pull works and those sort of things. But I assume the gynecologist would look at your stage of cycle and prescribe the pull according to that. But it's an interesting one. I'll tell you a funny story with the South African team, the hockey team, and it's just a tongue-in-cheek story, but they started syncing. We were away for 2 weeks. Well, no, we were away for 2 months, sorry. And almost everyone started syncing, including the support staff, physio, everyone. And the one day the coach was grumpy, and they're like, you're also syncing with everyone, and he's a male coach. So, but yeah. But the whole syncing thing is very interesting to me. I don't know how it happens. I don't understand the physiology. But But in the Western culture, you can make those jokes because it's like tongue-in-cheek, and like, coach, you're also syncing. And the players will say it to the coach as well. So, but yeah, that's how open it actually is. But yeah, sorry, I don't actually have an answer for you, Nikunj, but something you can go research and tell us.
I think in football they have got a menstrual cycle categorization tool.
Okay. Okay.
Before season they categorize status, hormonal, non-hormonal, like whether they are taking pill, which kind of pill they are taking, and all they keep that as a free data, and then they see how the other factors are moving with respect to that data.
So that we do. So we look at, it's very normal in South African system to be on the pill, maybe not from a cycle perspective, but sexual health and those sort of things. So we had one case now where she was on a specific pill, and one of the risks of that pill is pulmonary embolism, and she actually got a pulmonary embolism, and it was really, we didn't know about the pulmonary embolism. Obviously, she just felt heavy chested and not feeling good, went to the hospital, and thank God she went to the hospital, because with the pulmonary, if that thing dislodges, you're dead on the spot. And then the whole process from there is blood thinners, you're out for 6 months. So understanding what pill they're on becomes really important. That's out of my scope completely. But having indication and having that screening pattern form is really important, because then you identify this and then straight, okay, we need to see the gynecologist, change the pill, whatever it might be. But yeah, as soon as you're on those high risk pills and you do get something like a pulmonary embolism, it's really scary actually, because that's just another interesting story.
Awesome. So I think we have had a lot of fun, a lot of interesting discussions, and thank you so much for
Pleasure.
your time.
No, thank you guys.
A lot of fun.